So we are going to pick up where we left off Friday with legal review, which is right down here. Start with trade agreements. All right, so these are agreements that are made between countries addressing things such as taxes, tariffs, and other trade policies. So free trade agreements seek to eliminate all tariffs and quotas. And you'll often hear them talk about free trade agreements. They're not really free trade agreements. They still got tariffs and quotas in them. The General Agreements on Tariffs and Trade, otherwise known as GATT, was designed after World War II to support the Marshall Plan, which was the money we gave them to rebuild Europe by reducing barriers to trade. So it all started with GATT, and GATT was concerned with these kinds of trade issues. But it was replaced by the WTO, the World Trade Organization, in 1995. They say only 14 countries are non-members of WTO, but if you're from the Seattle area, you'll remember around 2000, 2001, they had the WTO riots here with everybody tearing up the city. So the WTO has developed various agreements that deal with things like trades in goods and services, intellectual property rights, and dispute settlement. There's also the United Nations Contracts for International Sale of Goods, also known as CISG, from 1980. It operates like a treaty, and it's patterned off of our Uniform Commercial Code. U.S. is a participating country, but PACCAR does not like it. And if you go and look at our LTA template on paragraph 37 under governing law, it says we're not going to use it under any circumstances. So there you go. I'd have to ask the attorney why they don't like it, but they don't. Trade regulations, typically part of trade agreements. So the two countries will sign the agreement, and then each side has to enact regulations to support the agreement. Incorporating the law in individual countries. So things like customs duties, anti-dumping embargoes, free trade zones, intellectual property quotas, government subsidies, etc. Customs laws addresses the importation of goods. So U.S. custom brokers, that's why we hire them, is because they're supposed to be familiar with these laws. And the Export Administration Act. So various laws sometimes restrict the export of goods and information and services. We don't usually run into issues with the trucking industry, but aerospace runs into it all the time. So they don't want to be exporting stuff to China that they can use in missile defense and things like that. Certain types of drawings, specifications, and prototypes are restricted on sending them to certain countries. Industry-specific laws and regulations. Certain industries in many countries have come under government regulation for environment, protection of the economic system. So this is the CHIPS Act here for us. Individual consumers, general public, etc. And then there's patent, copyright, trade secret, and trademark. This is all intellectual property. You know, there's two types of patents. There's a utility patent and a design patent. Utility is most common. It protects the functional aspects of the invention. The design patent is more if the main feature of the product is appearance, then it's a design patent. Now, this is what you got to go to your attorney with if you're going overseas with your drawing. Freedom to operate. What they're checking is, does the product infringe on valid IP of others? And whether such protection extends outside the country's borders depends on the existence of the trade agreements. So China doesn't recognize a lot of this stuff. The World Intellectual Property Office, or WIPO, seeks to align different countries' laws on intellectual property. Then you've got transportation logistics laws and regulations. So every country regulates these to some degree or another. In the US, we started with the Interstate Commerce Commission. That was eliminated in 95, and we split it up between the Department of Transportation and something called the Surface Transportation Board. And the UN has several standards for transportation, including the Convention on the Contract of the International Carriage of Goods. And the UCC has also been adopted by most states, which covers warehouse receipts, bill of lading, and other documents. And then you've got financial laws. A lot of these have to do with auditing financial statements. Countries have come together to form various organizations involved in financial regulations. So the International Monetary Fund is in the news a lot. The Bank for International Settlements, this is what the Federal Reserve is a member of, and other countries' national banks. And then this is the Financial Stability Board, which is international standards for financial reporting. So in the US, we also have the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act from 2010 after the big crash. Part of Title 15 of the Act requires disclosures on conflict minerals. So this is why we have to do this. And then you've also got Sarbanes-Oxley from 2002, which we've covered before, otherwise known as SOX. Got environmental laws in each of the different countries. We'll cover this more in 3F3. And there's large differences between developing countries and developed countries. Employment laws and regulation, a lot of countries have these. Most of the developed countries, you'll see employment laws. It can also cover things like trade unions and worker organizations. And then the developed countries will also usually have a lot of worker health and safety laws. OSHA administers it for us. International commerce. So in the US, there's a trade agreement from 1979 enacted to facilitate approval and implementation of trade agreements themselves. And then in 77, we have the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, prohibits bribing of foreign officials. And you get tested on that on a regular basis too. And then the North American Free Trade Act, otherwise known as NAFTA, from 1994, broke down a lot of trade barriers between Canada, US, and Mexico, not all of them, but most of them. And it was replaced just recently in July 2020 by the USMCA, United States Mexico Canada Agreement, otherwise known as AFTA-NAFTA. So here's some websites if you want to go study international law. And then you've got regulations for US federal procurement. So federal procurement and state and local government procurement is a very different animal than what we are used to. It's bound by the same laws as commercial procurement, but there are also additional restrictions like competitive closed bidding, inclusion of specific contract clauses, compliance with labor standards, supplier qualifications, that type of thing. And all this is encoded for the federal government in what's called the Federal Acquisition Regulations, or FAR. This is what governs their purchasing. False Claims Act, can't provide claims for fraud in the awarding of government contracts. And then there's also something called the Davis-Bacon Act from 1931 that protects union workers in federal building programs. So usually in federal building programs, you can't have non-unionized labor. Prompt Payment Act, Services Contract, Employment Standards, Prevailing Wages, that's kind of like Davis-Bacon. Walsh-Healy Act, 40-hour work week. Small Business Act from 1953, helps small businesses. The Buy American Act from 1933. And the Freedom of Information Act from 1966. So federal government has to disclose certain records upon request. And then you've got the UCC, or the Uniform Commercial Code. set of laws that provides legal rules and regulations governing commercial or business dealings in the United States. So regulates the transfer, sale of personal property. It doesn't deal with real estate. Code has the effect of law only when it's adopted by the different states. So you got this group that makes up the uniform law, says this is what it should look like, and but each state has to adopt it, and they usually change it some when they do adopt it. So it's not really uniform, but it's close. Sales applies to contracts for sale of goods, which is what we're usually concerned with. And the term merchant's understood to mean retail sales, but it's not limited in this definition. And it kind of depends on state to state how they define this stuff. Article 2 applies if it's for goods. If it covers services or real estate, then no. So this is what the Washington version of it looks like. This is the UCC that's been adopted by Washington state legislature. And then here's the UCC itself that they send out to the states. And if you want to know more about how the whole process works, you can check these two websites here. All right. Created as part of a larger plan for economic recovery following World War II, which of the following is a multilateral agreement that has the purpose and effect of reducing barriers to world trade? So what was put together to support the Marshall Plan? It's your history lesson for today. What'd you say?
D.
Yeah, B. GATT. Replaced by the WTO. B it is. Created in 1947. So it ran from 47 to 95. All right, there's 5 questions out there, numbers 6 through 10. Go ahead and work on them, and then we'll go over answers at 2:20, or raise your hand when you get done. We'll do it earlier. We'll get them all done. So this is from 1D4, which was posted last Friday, I think. let's go over some answers. Number 6 is Delta. The UCC covers the purchase and sale of goods. It does not apply to services. 7 is Charlie. UCC is a body of trade law that governs commerce between the states. CISG is used as a model to define international law between countries. 8 is Bravo. A freedom to operate analysis is completed by a law firm that specializes in patent law. 9 is Alpha. Dodd-Frank law is the one that set out the requirements for conflict minerals. And 10 is Bravo. The United States, Canada, Mexico Agreement, USMCA, is what followed NAFTA. Any questions?
Hey, Rick, for that last question, would ISM have it updated in case like they're stuck in 2020 or something like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so NAFTA ran from 94 to 2020, and USMCA runs from 2020 to present.
I'm just worried they don't update their answer key and it's still stuck pre-2020, but shouldn't be a problem anyway.
You'd hope they would. Yeah, I would go with what's actually true on that, something like that. Any other questions? All right, we got one more day of legal stuff tomorrow, and then we get to do some more practice questions this week. Talk to you guys later.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.